The radio crackled at 0847 on a Tuesday morning in the high desert east of Camp Pendleton, and the voice that came through it was the calmest thing anyone on that frequency had heard in 3 years of combined deployments. Riley's stable, tourniquet high and tight. I need evac at grid 27-9er-486. Femoral involvement controlled. He's not going anywhere bad. Silence. Then from somewhere on the same ridge, a single rifle shot. One, just one. The kind of shot that professional shooters describe as clean. The kind that comes at the end of a long calculation, wind distance, mirage heartbeat, and arrives at its destination with the absolute certainty of something inevitable. Sergeant Wade Harmon keyed his radio with a hand that was not quite steady. That shot was 840 meters. Barrett's down. Who the hell just... Nobody answered him. And in 22 years of service, including 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq, and a classified rotation he still wasn't allowed to discuss. At dinner, Wade Harmon had never heard silence answer a question quite like that. He stood on that ridge for 3 full seconds, which is a long time when your brain is trying to reconcile what your ears just told you with what you believed was possible. Then he started moving. 72 hours before that transmission, nobody on his team would have believed what they had just heard, including Harmon himself. The desert east of Camp Pendleton stretches out in that particular California way, brown and vast and indifferent to human ambition. The mountains beyond sit low on the horizon, dusty purple in the morning and bone white by noon. The Pacific is somewhere behind you, invisible, but present the way important things often are. Daniel Voss understood that terrain. He had understood terrain the way other men understood language, not as information, but as communication. Every ridge told you something. Every ravine made an argument. Every piece of elevated ground was either an opportunity or a threat, and the difference between the two was entirely a matter of who got there first. The Marine Corps called him Ghost, not because he was quiet, though he was, not because he was hard to find, though he was that too. They called him Ghost because of what happened to the men he was sent to find, because of the 162 confirmed kills spread across Desert Storm and 2 subsequent deployments into Afghanistan. Because when Ghost Voss set up a firing position, the target simply ceased to exist, and no one on the opposing side ever quite understood how. He was not a complicated man. He believed in fundamentals. He believed that excellence was not a gift, but a discipline, and that discipline was not something you practiced when you felt like it. It was something you practiced, especially when you didn't. He believed that sloppy work cost lives. Not metaphorically, literally, he had seen it happen. He passed these beliefs to his daughter the way other fathers pass down fishing techniques or woodworking skills. Methodically, patiently, with high expectations and zero apology for having them. Kara Voss learned to clean a rifle before she learned to drive a car. She was 10 years old the first time her father put a .22 in her hands on a range outside 29 Palms, and what he said to her that day was not what most fathers say. He did not say, "Be careful." He did not say, "Don't worry, it won't bite." He said, "The rifle is honest. It does exactly what you tell it to do. If it misses, that's you. If it hits, that's also you. There's no machine to blame and no luck to thank. Just you and the decision you made." She shot a half-inch group at 50 yards on her 3rd try. Ghost Voss did not tell her she was exceptional. He told her to do it again. He had called her Tessa from the time she was old enough to have a name and too young to have preferences. About it, a shortened form of her middle name, a thing that existed only between them. The name the journal used, the name she would not hear from anyone else on Earth after the spring of 2021. By 16, she was shooting competition at distances that made grown men squint. By 17, she held a marksmanship instructor certification that most career military personnel never achieved. She won a national championship with a score that the judges discussed afterward in the parking lot, not because they doubted it, but because they needed to hear it out loud. Her mother kept different memories, the ones that didn't involve rifle cases and range fees and the particular smell of Hops No. 9 solvent that seemed to live permanently in the fibers of Daniel Voss's field jacket. Her mother kept the birthday dinners and the Christmas mornings and the school plays where Kara stood in the 2nd row and sang slightly off-key and looked exactly like her father and nothing like either of them at all. In 2021, Daniel Voss was diagnosed with metastatic cancer. The oncologist used words like aggressive and origin point, and we're looking at a fairly compressed timeline, and Daniel Voss received this information the way he received most information, without drama, with a quiet request for specifics. He wanted numbers. He got them. 18 months, give or take, depending on how the treatment responded. The treatment did not respond. What killed Ghost Voss was not a rifle or an IED or any of the thousand things he had professionally calculated against throughout a career that spanned 3 decades. What killed him was the invisible residue of a war he had fought 30 years earlier, chemical exposure from burning oil fields, from classified operational environments in Desert Storm, and 2 subsequent Afghanistan rotations in 2003 and 2005, from the ordinary carelessness of a military that did not yet understand what it was asking its people to absorb. He spent those 18 months doing the things a man does when he knows the timeline. He organized. He wrote. He made phone calls that cost him more than he let on. One of those phone calls was to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. The letter that followed was 6 pages handwritten in the precise and slightly cramped penmanship of a man whose hands had begun to shake, but whose standards had not. It was a recommendation, formal, documented, argued in the language of military bureaucracy, that his daughter be granted special consideration for the Scout Sniper Pipeline, a program that had never accepted a civilian candidate in its history. He mailed it in October. He was dead by the following spring. At the graveside, in the particular flat light of a California afternoon, Cara Voss made a promise. She made it to her mother, who was standing beside her in a black dress that did not fit correctly because grief does things to a body that clothing cannot anticipate. She made it quietly in the voice she used for things she meant completely. Never again. I'm done with it. Her mother did not ask her to elaborate. She understood what the rifle had cost their family. She understood that sometimes the thing that makes you exceptional is also the thing that makes you unreachable. She squeezed her daughter's hand and did not argue. 3 years later, Hospital Corpsman Third Class Cara Voss had an 18-month deployment record that included 63 casualties treated and 0 preventable deaths. Her service file listed marksmanship scores that required annual qualification. They were good. They were the scores of someone who had not touched a precision rifle in 3 years and was maintaining minimum standards because the minimum existed. Anyone looking at that file would see a competent corpsman with strong medical instincts and adequate weapons familiarity. No one looking at that file would see Ghost Voss's daughter. That was entirely intentional. Camp Pendleton on a Tuesday morning in June operates on its own logic, a universe of controlled urgency where the pace of everything is calibrated slightly above comfortable and slightly below emergency. The smell is diesel and dry grass in the particular metallic heat of equipment that has been sitting in the California sun since before most of the people using it were born. The transport vehicle stopped at 07:15 and Cara Voss stepped off it carrying a medical pack that weighed 42 pounds. She carried it the way you carry something you have carried for long enough that the weight has become part of your awareness rather than a complaint present accounted for irrelevant. She was 5'3", in a unit where the average male height was 6'1", and the average pack weight was distributed across frames built for exactly this purpose. She was the period at the end of a sentence made entirely of exclamation points. Sergeant Wade Harmon was waiting with a clipboard and the particular expression of a man running an internal recalibration that he was too professional to show externally. 45 years old. A face that had been weathered by deployments rather than age, which produces a different kind of weathering, harder in some places, softer in others, with no obvious logic to the distribution. He had a scar on his left forearm that he never discussed, in a way of standing that communicated authority without requiring any observable effort. He looked at her name on the clipboard, then at her. Then back at the clipboard with a half-second pause that was not about doubt but about something else, something locating itself in memory. Corpsman Voss. Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. He held her gaze for a beat longer than professional assessment required. Then he turned to the team. 8 men, 8 pairs of eyes performing the same calculations simultaneously. Who is this person? What do they bring? What do they cost? Not hostile, not welcoming. The honest skepticism of professionals who have seen slots filled by the wrong people and understand exactly what that looks like when things go sideways. Staff Sergeant Cole Barrett stood at the right edge of the formation, 38 years old, designated marksman, dark features in the particular stillness of someone who had spent years behind a scope learning that patience was not a personality trait, but a tactical skill. He did not look at Cara the way the others looked at her. He looked at her the way a shooter looks at a distant target, with focus stripped of emotion cataloging detail. CWO Miles Decker stood slightly apart from the formation the way men of certain experience tend to stand present, but not embedded, observing from a position that allowed the widest possible field of view. 52 years old, silver hair, the kind of lean that comes from decades of maintenance rather than youth. He had served in the Gulf War in 2 rotations in Afghanistan and in classified capacities that had given him the permanent habit of watching rooms rather than simply occupying them. He was watching Kara now, not with the skepticism the others wore openly, with something more specific, something that looked like a question he was already partway through answering. LCPL Finn Riley stood near the center of the formation with the open face of someone who had not yet learned to hide what he was thinking. 22 years old, South Boston accent, red hair, that refused military regulation no matter how short he cut it. He gave Kara a small nod when she made eye contact, the kind of nod that means I'm not part of the problem. Corporal Brett Conroy stood to Harmon's left with the posture of a former college athlete, a defensive lineman's frame packed into desert camouflage blonde hair in a high and tight blue eyes that had learned professional skepticism the hard way. He did not say anything. He had already formed an opinion and was waiting for the evidence to confirm it. Harmon addressed the team with the economy of a man who understood that words had operational value and excess reduced it. Corpsman Voss is joining our medical integration rotation for this cycle. Our last corpsman, Petty Officer Hayes, requested reassignment following last month's live fire exercise. He froze when we needed him not to. A pause that acknowledged what that cost without dwelling on it. The standard here is simple. When someone goes down, you move toward them, not away. Everything else is secondary. He looked at Kara. Clear gunnery, Sergeant. No elaboration. No promise of performance. Just acknowledgement, the professional's way of saying, I have heard the standard and I understand it applies to me. Riley fell into step beside her as the team moved toward the equipment bay. Quietly, without making a production of it, don't take Conroy personally. He's not mean. He just doesn't update his opinion until you give him a reason to. Kara looked at him. How many reasons does it take? Riley considered this with genuine seriousness. For Conroy, more than one. Less than 10. She nodded once. Filed it. The morning began with close quarters battle drills on the southern range, controlled fire movement patterns, the repetitive muscle building of small unit tactics that looked from any distance like organized chaos and felt from inside it like the gradual accumulation of something that might save your life. Kara stood at the edge of the shade structure with her medical kit open and her attention distributed across the formation in a way that looked like passive observation and was not. PFC Rowan Streck was 19 years old and had been in the unit for 4 months. 6'1", a Georgia kid with good instincts and the kind of energy that comes from not yet understanding how much the job costs. He had been moving through the drill with adequate precision for the first 40 minutes. In the last 8, something had shifted. Not dramatically, not in any way that would register on a formation evaluation or a training report, but Kara had been watching bodies under stress for 18 months on forward deployment, and she knew what adequate looked like, and she knew what adequate beginning to fail looked like, and she knew the space between the two was measured in minutes. Streck's footwork was 2 beats slow on his right lateral movements. His rifle was tracking a quarter second behind his visual focal point. His processing had degraded the higher functions, rationing energy away from fine motor coordination. His face was flushed in a pattern that was not exertion red, but something deeper, something with a different physiological signature. His hands gripping the weapon were exhibiting a tremor he was compensating for without knowing he was compensating. Core temperature approximately 104.2 degrees, maybe higher. She crossed the 30 yards between the shade structure and the formation at a pace that was not running. Running signals, emergency signals. Chaos and chaos was the last thing the situation needed. She walked with the specific intention that people learn to recognize as belonging to someone who knows exactly where they are going and why. Gunnery, Sergeant. She kept her eyes on Streck. PFC Streck is presenting early heat stroke indicators. Core temp estimate 104, possibly higher. He needs immediate intervention. Every eye in the formation shifted to Streck. Now that someone had said it, it was obvious. The flush, the lag, the hands. Classic presentation sitting in plain sight, invisible until named. Harmon Streck, down now. Streck went down the way people go down when their body has been waiting for permission. Knees first, then hands, then a forward lean that would have become a faceplant without intervention. Kara was beside him before he completed the descent. Ice packs already in hand pulled during the approach, anticipating the sequence. She placed them at the groin, the armpits, the neck. Core temperature management, maximum efficiency, minimum wasted time. Staff Sergeant Barrett, elevate his legs. Corporal Conroy, water. Small sips when he's conscious. Don't let him drink fast. Barrett moved without comment. Conroy moved with a fraction of a second delay that had everything to do with the brief recalibration required when orders arrived from an unexpected source and nothing to do with unwillingness. Streck's eyes opened. Focused. Lost focus. Focused again. Stay with me, PFC. Your body got ahead of you. That's what we're fixing right now. Temporal artery thermometer. Digital readout, 104.2. She looked at Harmon. He needs IV fluids and monitoring. Organ stress is possible at this duration. We got him in time, but this doesn't resolve in the field. Harmon was already on the radio. Barrett held Streck's legs elevated with matter-of-fact competence, but his attention was not entirely on the task. It was on the corpsman beside him. The way she had pulled those ice packs before she reached the casualty. The way her voice had the quality of someone who had given exactly these instructions in exactly these circumstances many times before. The way her eyes, when she scanned the formation, moved in the pattern of tactical assessment rather than medical assessment. He noted this. He did not say anything. The medical transport arrived in 11 minutes. Kara gave the handoff brief with the efficiency of someone who understands that the EMTs do not need her feelings. They need the data onset, time temperature, reading treatment, administered, current status risk factors in transit. Clean, clinical, complete. When the transport left, Harmon walked over. That was sharp work. Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. How did you see it? We were all watching the same drill. You were watching the mission. I was watching the men. A short answer. True, not complete. Because the complete answer included years of training that had nothing to do with medicine training, in observation, in threat assessment, in reading small details that telegraphed larger problems. Training from a man who taught her that survival depended on seeing what others missed. But that training was buried, and Kara intended for it to stay that way. Harmon looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully read. Something moved behind his eyes. Then he turned back to the team. At 1500 hours, the medical drill. Lieutenant Commander Greer Aldcroft held the stopwatch and had the expression of a man who had evaluated combat medics for 12 years and knew the territory well enough to recognize when something unusual was happening. 2 mannequin casualties blast injuries on the first facial trauma and suspected spinal compromise on the second. The scenario was designed to separate competent from exceptional through the application of time-pressure sensory overload and the demand for perfect sequencing when everything was falling apart simultaneously. She entered the scenario space and the assessment began before most observers registered that it had. Primary casualty first, the one actively dying. Combat application tourniquet high on the residual limb, 1 motion perfect tension. Airway compromise, jaw thrust managed without advanced intervention. Chest seal over the sucking wound vented preventing tension pneumothorax. 90 seconds. Primary casualty stabilized to the degree the scenario permitted. Secondary casualty. Spinal precautions. Cervical collar. Facial wound assessment. Airway breathing circulation all adequate. Back to primary. IV. Access large bore catheter left antecubital first attempt. Fluid resuscitation running. Radio handoff. 2 sentences. Everything the receiving physician needed. Nothing they didn't. Aldcroft's stopwatch read 4:18 when she stood and declared the scenario complete. He stared at the readout. Standard completion time for a competent corpsman, 7 minutes. A good corpsman completed in 6. Exceptional candidates, the ones that showed up once or twice in a 12-year career, completed in just under 5. 4:18 was a number he was going to be thinking about for a while. He walked the scenario checking her work. Tourniquet placement perfect. Chest seal perfect. IV access perfect. Spinal precautions perfect. 0 errors. 0 missed steps. 0 signs of stress or hesitation. Where did you train, Corpsman Voss? Naval Hospital Corps School, sir. Then Fleet Marine Force. Then deployment. That doesn't explain this. He gestured at the scenario. This is advanced trauma response. Where did you really train? Her face did not move. I read extensively, sir. I practice until the procedure is muscle memory. I take the curriculum seriously. He wrote something on his clipboard. True, he thought, and incomplete in a way he couldn't quite name. There was something in how she moved, how she tracked the environment, while her hands were occupied with entirely different tasks that suggested a kind of training that did not appear in any medical curriculum he had encountered. The armory at 1930 was quiet. Most of the team had secured their weapons and moved to chow. Kara had volunteered for logistics, restocking the trauma kits in the armory storage locker, the kind of task that gets done when someone understands that tomorrow's emergency does not care whether tonight's paperwork was completed. She came through the door with her resupply bag and moved to the storage locker. Hands sorting chest seals to the left, tourniquets, to the right, hemostatic agents in the center slot where hands would reach first. The rifle rack was to her right. She did not intend to look at it. The Barrett M82A1 was mounted at eye level, and her peripheral vision caught the silhouette the way you catch the silhouette of something your visual cortex has spent years cataloging as significant. The specific geometry of the pistol grip, the mass of the muzzle, the particular dimensions of a weapon she had fired thousands of rounds through over 7 years. Her hand moved before her mind registered the intention. Left hand reaching out. Fingers found the barrel shroud without visual guidance. Slid to the grip. Her thumb located the magazine release with the ease of a habit so old it existed below the level of conscious thought. The right hand lifted, positioned itself on the pistol grip with the precise geometry that 20,000 repetitions had carved into muscle and tendon and bone. Weight distribution between the two hands, correct automatic competition level. Her body remembered things she had instructed it to forget. That's not familiarization. The voice came from the back of the armory, low and even. Cole Barrett was at the maintenance bench, an M24 field stripped, in front of him, a cleaning rod in his right hand. He had been there when she walked in. She had not seen him. He was looking at her hands. She withdrew from the rifle. The movement was controlled, not rushed, but immediate. Professional composure snapping back into place. Manual familiarization, Staff Sergeant, standard protocol. Barrett stood. He moved with purpose, and he was now standing in the middle of the armory, with his eyes on the space where her hands had been. Manuals don't teach you where to put your hands without looking. His voice carried no accusation. It carried something more unsettling: precision. They don't teach you magazine release placement at speed. They don't teach you pistol grip geometry for recoil management. That's repetition, hundreds of hours of it. She met his eyes. I should get back to the quarters. Early day tomorrow. She picked up her resupply bag and left. Barrett stood in the armory for 30 seconds after she was gone. He looked at the Barrett M82A1. He looked at where her hands had been, the positions, the geometry, the muscle memory laid bare in a moment of unguarded contact. He had been a precision shooter for 12 years. He knew what it looked like when someone related to a weapon, the way he related to weapons, not as a tool they used, but as something their hands understood at a level below language. Caravas related to that rifle exactly the way he related to his M24. He pulled out his phone, opened his notes, typed a name, then something beside it. Then set the phone face down on the maintenance bench and sat with what he had just seen, something he was going to need to understand before tomorrow, because instinct and experience were telling him in the same voice that Corman Caravas was not what her service records said she was. She was something more, and she was working very hard to make sure nobody figured that out. The California night had settled into the particular quiet of a base that never fully slept. Generators' distant footsteps. The low mechanical hum of things kept running for reasons that did not stop at nightfall. The kind of quiet that gave thought room to move. Kara sat on her bunk with the footlocker open in front of her. Under the medical texts, under the spare uniforms, under the layer of professional life she had built in the 3 years since the funeral. The journal was brown leather, worn soft, with handling his hands first, then hers. The pen marks visible through the cover were her father's, angular, precise, the handwriting of a man who had believed that sloppy writing cost lives and had applied this belief to everything he touched. Inside the cover, she knew without opening it, was the name he had always used for her, the one that existed only between them, the one she would not hear from anyone else on earth. She had carried this journal for 5 years without opening it. She confirmed it was there. She closed the footlocker. She lay back on the bunk. Her hands folded on her chest, remembered the Barrett M82A1. Somewhere in the armory, she knew a man with 12 years of precision shooting experience was adding her name to a list of things that didn't add up. And in 72 hours, give or take, she was going to make it impossible for anyone to pretend she was only one thing. But that was still 72 hours away. Tonight, she was just a corpsman, just a medic, just someone trying to be excellent at the life she had chosen rather than haunted by the life she had inherited. It almost worked. The patrol stepped off at 0630 under a sky that had not yet committed to the full violence of what the day intended to become. 9 bodies moving in tactical formation through terrain that communicated its hostility through temperature alone. The high desert northeast of the base sat at 1,500 feet of elevation and operated on the logic that altitude was not relief from heat, but simply a different expression of it, drier, thinner, with a quality of sunlight that felt less like illumination and more like pressure applied directly to exposed skin. By the time they were 2 kilometers out, the thermometer on Riley's pack read 104 degrees Fahrenheit. By the time they were 4 kilometers out, it read 108. Kara carried 62 pounds. Medical pack patrol gear, water, additional trauma supplies, 3 liters of extra hydration because she had done the arithmetic the night before. 8 men, 8 kilometers of elevation, gain 108 degrees, and the particular brand of stubbornness that combat units develop toward acknowledging physical limitation. Riley fell into step beside her on the 2nd kilometer with the unconscious social instinct of someone who did not know how to be indifferent to other people. That's more than half your body weight. She did not look at him. He nodded, acknowledging that the conversation was over before it began. The terrain opened up ahead into a series of ridgelines running north to south, the kind of geography that tacticians study and hikers encounter once and remember for years. Every piece of elevated ground was an invitation and a warning simultaneously. Harmon moved to her left on the 3rd kilometer, and she registered him the way she registered everything, without turning her head, through peripheral awareness and the particular attunement to proximity that 18 months of forward deployment had made permanent. He walked with her for 40 meters without speaking. She had the sense of a man in the process of deciding something. Then he moved back to the front of the formation. 20 minutes later, on the far side of a dry wash, he did it again, came alongside her. The desert stretched in every direction. No one was watching this particular 6 feet of space. He opened his mouth, closed it, returned to position. She filed this away with everything else. She was filing the temperature, the hydration status of each man in the formation, the wind direction, the shadow patterns on the ridgeline ahead. The question she had not yet asked about why Harmon looked at her last name the way he had when she arrived. At 09:15, between 2 ridges with a ravine to the west and open exposure to the north, the training exercise became something else. The pyrotechnics went off as planned, simulated ambush role players on the ridge with blank ammunition in controlled bursts. The team executed immediate action drill with the smooth efficiency of 6 months of shared training. Then the ricochet. A blank cartridge casing ejected from the role player's position at an angle that no one had calculated struck granite at a velocity, an angle that produced a fragment approximately the size of a shirt button, and that fragment traveled in a direction that had no tactical awareness and no particular malice. It found the gap between SS Giant Cole Barrett's vest and his right shoulder pad, and it stopped in the muscle. Barrett made no sound. He went to a knee behind the nearest boulder and pressed his left hand against his right shoulder. Contact. I'm hit. Right shoulder. Can't manipulate my weapon. His voice was level, the voice of a man reporting a mechanical problem, because that was in the most practical sense what had happened. His rifle was a 30-pound piece of equipment he could not operate. He was the team's only designated marksman. Harmon registered this in the time it takes a person who has been doing this for 20 years to register a tactical problem, which is the same time it takes to receive the information, because there is no buffer between receiving and understanding. He keyed his radio. All elements, exercise status update. Real casualty, Barrett right shoulder. We are still receiving simulated fire from elevated positions. Anyone else on this net qualified on precision rifle? The silence that followed had a texture. It was not the silence of men who had not heard the question. It was the silence of men running the same calculation and arriving at the same answer, which was that Barrett was the answer, and Barrett was down, and no one else in this formation had the answer. 8 seconds passed. Then CWO Miles Decker's voice came over the radio, quiet and certain in the manner of a man who had been running a different calculation and had just completed it. Corpsman Voss. A pause of exactly 1 second. Can you shoot? The question went out on the team frequency. 9 people heard it. 9 people processed it. 9 people arrived at different versions of the same place. The recognition that this question would not have been asked if there were a better option, and the absence of a better option was its own kind of answer. Kara was 20 meters from Barrett's position, moving through cover to reach him, medical bag already unsnapped. She stopped. The distance to the elevated position was 820 meters. She had estimated it on the approach automatically, the way her father had taught her to see terrain as a series of numbers that required solving before they required crossing. She looked at the M24 beside Barrett, the rifle she had qualified on, the weapon she had operated so many times that her hands had their own relationship with it, separate from her intentions. She had not fired this class of weapon in 5 years. She had made a promise. She keyed her radio. Affirmative. I can shoot. Conroy's voice came through without pause, carrying the specific strain of a man who cared about his formation and did not know what to do with an answer that challenged his categories. Gunny, she's our corpsman. She's got a casualty. Harmon Barrett stable. Who else have I got? Corporal silence. Marlowe, get on that rifle. She was already at Barrett. 30 seconds of assessment, fragment seated in the muscle below the rotator cuff. No arterial involvement, significant pain. Complete loss of right arm, function for precision work. Pressure dressing applied, arm secured. She looked him in the eye. You're stable. Don't move the shoulder. I know. He looked at the M24, then at her. Something crossed his face that was not quite an expression. She picked up the rifle. Her hands found it the way they had found the Barrett in the armory before she told them to, before she gave them permission. The grip, the stock to the shoulder, eye to scope. The world narrowed to the diameter of the optical system, and in that circle was a ridgeline, 820 meters away. The scope showed her the target in the way she had been trained to see targets not as people, but as problems requiring solutions, as mathematical relationships between distance and windage, and elevation and time. It also showed her the distance, and the distance showed her how long it had been. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, with the particular tremor of a body fighting its own physiology, the adrenaline of a moment she had not prepared for, the weight of a promise pressing on her chest with physical force, 5 years of deliberate distance arriving all at once. She used the technique her father had drilled into her 100 times, the breathing sequence, for calming a heart rate through respiratory control, the method that worked on a range at 29 palms on cool evenings with no one waiting on you, and also theoretically in every other circumstance. Her heart rate did not slow the way it should have. Wind 7 knots left to right. Temperature 108 degrees, producing thermal mirage that distorted the target in the upper half of the scope. Bullet drop at this distance 32 inches. Wind drift 0.6 mil right. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired. Recoil into the shoulder, the familiar percussion of a thing that had been part of her body for the first 17 years of her life and absent for the last 5. Through the scope, she tracked the trace. Miss. 5 inches left. She had overcorrected for the wind. The first shot error of a shooter whose hands were not settled, whose physiology was fighting the calculation. The adrenaline had added to the wind adjustment instead of correcting for it. Conroy on the radio, damn it. Riley said nothing. She worked the bolt. The motion was smooth in the way that deep muscle memory is always smooth, not connected to the rest of her, operating on its own track. Ejected brass, fresh round chambered, scope back on target. The miss had done something she had not expected. It had burned the shaking away. Not because failure clarified her, not because missing resolved the conflict she was carrying, but because the miss was a specific technical error, with a specific technical cause, and a specific technical correction, and technical problems were the one category in which she had no argument with herself. She had overcorrected 0.4 mil. The correction was known. Trust the calculation. Do not add fear to the mathematics. Her heart rate dropped, then dropped again. The target was moving slightly, the role player repositioning, which changed the problem from static to dynamic. Led by half a body width, accounting for movement at approximately 2 feet per second. The mirage was thicker now. She read it not as obstruction, but as information. The heat shimmer confirmed the wind at the target location was consistent with what she was feeling on her face. She breathed out halfway, held a partial exhale, squeezed. The rifle fired. 820 meters away, the roles player went horizontal in the practice drop of someone following exercise protocols. Simulated enemy fire stopped. The ridge went silent. Harmon's voice came through after 3 full seconds. Good shooting. 2 words. Deployed without ceremony or elaboration, which was the precise, correct amount. Barrett beside her on the ground looked at her with an expression caught between gratitude and something that took longer to name, the recognition of a craftsman watching another craftsman work, complicated by the fact that he had not known she was a craftsman until 45 seconds ago. She set the rifle down and went back to treating his shoulder. The team converged on Barrett's position in the following minutes, and in the convergence the shift was palpable. The recalibration of 9 people simultaneously revising a conclusion they had held since Tuesday morning. Not loud, not announced. The specific quiet of a formation adjusting to new information through changed proximity and modified eye contact, in the particular way professionals acknowledge each other's capability without making it a discussion. Conroy said nothing, but he was looking at her differently, and not looking at her differently was a choice he was making 1 second at a time. The training evolution terminated at 11:40. The debrief was at 1400. She had been here before in the aftermath of something that had forced information out of her that she had worked to keep contained. The debrief was going to require answers to questions she had spent 5 years not being asked. She was not wrong. The operations office held Harmon and Decker and a computer monitor displaying her complete service record with sections highlighted that she recognized as the sections she had hoped would remain unremarkable under normal operational review. Harmon gestured to the chair across the desk. She sat. Decker was at the window. His posture had the quality of a man who had already processed the relevant information and was present to observe what happened next. Harmon spoke first. Marksmanship instructor certification age 17. Most career military personnel don't achieve that certification at all. You had it before you enlisted. He waited. Scout Sniper School admission recommendation declined. The invitation was extended under a provision used exactly twice in the program's history. You were one of 2 people in 20 years offered civilian consideration. He looked up from the monitor. The other person was also named Voss. She held his gaze. We pulled your father's complete record. Colonel Daniel Voss. Ghost, Desert Storm 1991, Afghanistan 2003 and 2005. Scout Sniper School Chief Instructor. 162, confirmed kills, died 2021. He paused. Pancreatic cancer, metastatic involvement, Gulf War exposure origin. He closed the folder. What he said next was quiet. I served with your father in Kunar Province, Afghanistan. Summer of 2003. The room changed, not visually, not acoustically, but something in the pressure of the space shifted in the way spaces shift when someone says a thing that has weight. I was in a situation I should not have survived. A sniper element had us pinned for 11 hours on a ridgeline that had no good options on any side. Your father was operating at 1,100 meters with a crosswind that I still don't fully understand how he calculated. Harmon's voice was level, but level in the way of a man speaking carefully around something that still had edges. He made 3 shots in 14 minutes. The situation ended. He reached into the folder and placed a document on the desk between them. 6 pages, handwritten. The penmanship familiar, angular, precise, the letters formed with the discipline of a man who had believed that sloppy writing cost lives. Her father's handwriting. On the bottom right corner of the first page, a date. October 2020, 6 months before he died. He sent this to the commandant, Harmon said quietly. I've had a copy for 4 years. I've been waiting to understand when to give it. She looked at the letter, did not touch it. Decker from the window said nothing. Harmon understood the specific weight that paper could carry when the person who wrote it was no longer alive. He did not push. Take the letter. Read it when you're ready. The debrief on the range incident is at 0800 tomorrow. Tonight you have time. He walked to the door, stopped. Whatever you decide, you shot well today. The first round was the nerves. The second round was you. He left. Decker remained at the window for a moment. Then he followed Harmon and the door closed, and she was alone in the operations office with her father's handwriting 6 inches from her right hand. She sat with it. Then she picked it up. She went back to the barracks in the late afternoon light, the letter in her medical bag, alongside the trauma supplies and the hemostatic agents and all the tools of the life she had chosen. In the footlocker under the medical techs, under the spare uniforms, was the journal. She had confirmed its existence every night for 5 years and opened it none of those nights. She opened it tonight. The entry was dated 2 weeks before his death, when the handwriting had begun to reflect what the cancer was doing, the letters slightly larger. The pressure on the page lighter, the precision still present, but arrived at through effort rather than instinct. He had written to her directly. He was not a man who communicated around the perimeter of a thing. Tessa, I don't know if teaching you to shoot was right. Not the way I did it. Not starting at 10, not building it into the structure of how I taught you to think. I know it was what I had. I know it was the most honest thing I could give you, the thing I understood better than anything else. But knowing that doesn't resolve the question. Medicine saves the man in front of you. The rifle saves the men behind him. I spent my career doing one thing and I did it well, and I cannot tell you with certainty that I would do it differently. But I can tell you that I watched you grow up, and what I saw was someone who could do both. Not because you were exceptional, although you were, but because you understood that both things come from the same place. The same decision to be present. The same refusal to look away. I'm not asking you to use the rifle. I'm not asking you to break a promise you made at my grave, which I imagine you have made knowing you. I'm asking you to understand that the capability doesn't belong to me. I taught it to you, but it became yours. What you do with yours is a decision I don't get to make. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't say that in the ways that would have been more useful. She read it twice. She sat with it in the way that certain things require being sat with, not analyzed, not decided upon, simply held until they settle into their proper relationship with everything else. Then she placed the journal on her bunk, not in the footlocker, which was a small thing, and also not a small thing. She took out her father's letter to the commandant. He had used the formal language of official military correspondence, precise, argued, evidenced. He described her capability in terms of professional, used to describe professional capacity. He cited specific scores, specific certifications, specific demonstrations of aptitude. He made the case for her admission to the Scout Sniper pipeline with the thoroughness of a man who understood that bureaucracies responded to documentation rather than sentiment. And then in the final paragraph, he departed from the formal register. She is not me. She will never be me, and I would not wish her to be. But she has something I did not. She knows the cost of the capability she carries, and she will apply it with a wisdom I never had. That is worth more than any score on any evaluation. I am recommending her because I believe she would protect people better than I ever could, not instead of healing them, along with it. She put the letter down. The knock on the doorframe was quiet. Barrett stood in the opening, not quite inside, in the way a man stands when he is not sure he belongs in a space, but has decided to be there anyway. He was in off-duty clothes, his right arm in a sling, and he had the manner of a man who had made a decision during a walk and had not changed his mind on arrival. He came in, sat on the footlocker across from her bunk without asking, which was the kind of presumption that communicated respect rather than its opposite. A long silence. 20 seconds. 30. My spotter in Ramadi, he said. 2006. Aaron Calhoun from Wichita. Good shooter, better reader of terrain. Barrett looked at the floor at a point approximately 3 feet in front of his boots. He went down from a ricocheted round, almost exactly what happened to me today, except his was in the neck and it was arterial. He stopped. She waited. I was 400 meters from the follow-on target. I had the solution. Wind distance, unbit. I had been running the calculation for 6 minutes. Clean shot, but I watched him go down and I came off the scope. He was quiet for a moment. By the time I came back to it, the target had displaced. We lost the objective. 3 days later, we lost a forward element because that target was still active. He looked up. I've been watching you since the armory. The night you touched the M82, I ran your name. I know who your father was. A pause. I know what your scores were. I know about the national championship. She held the information without reacting to it. Today, he said, you assessed me, transitioned to the rifle, missed the first round, adjusted, and made the second round at 820 meters. He shook his head slowly. I came off the scope once, and I've been living with it for 18 years. You've been carrying what you're carrying, and you didn't come off. He stood. I've been wrong about you since Tuesday morning. He said it the way professionals say things that cost them something, simply, directly, without amplification. That's the only thing I wanted to say. He walked to the door. Barrett. He stopped. Calhoun survived. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Yeah, he said. He did. He left. She sat with the quiet for a long time afterward. The journal on the bunk beside her. Her father's letter on the footlocker. The M24 standing in the corner, which Harmon had authorized her to secure temporarily pending the morning's debrief. Nothing had been decided. No line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed, technically speaking. She had fired a rifle in a training scenario because the tactical situation required it, and the promise she had made at a graveside had not anticipated a tactical situation because promises made at gravesides are made by people who cannot see forward and the future does not ask permission. The morning would bring a debrief, then a mission brief, then something real with real stakes in the kind of terrain and circumstance that did not accommodate the luxury of choosing which part of yourself to bring. She lay back on the bunk. Her hands folded on her chest were still. The mission brief was at 0800, and the operations room held a different quality of attention than the training debriefs that had preceded it. Harmon stood at the head of the table with the posture of a man who had made the internal shift from training mode to operational mode, communicated only through the specific compression of expression that occurs when stakes change from instructional to real. The topographical maps were not training maps. The satellite imagery carried classification stamps representing actual risk taken by actual people. 11 civilians were being held in a compound in remote high desert terrain in central Nevada, approximately 60 kilometers from the nearest population center. The compound sat in a valley formed by 3 converging ridgelines, defensible, isolated, chosen by people who understood terrain, the way people who intend to hold ground understand terrain. Intelligence placed the hostile element at 18 to 20 armed individuals distributed between the compound interior and observation posts on two of the three surrounding ridgelines. All viable approaches to the compound pass through ground observable from one or both elevated positions. Two confirmed sniper positions, Harmon said. North Ridge 840 meters from the compound perimeter. East Ridge 640 meters. Both positions have line of sight to all three approach corridors. We do not move on the compound until both positions are suppressed. He did not look at Kara when he said it. He did not need to. Barrett was at the table in the posture of a man whose attendance was professional rather than functional. He was the team's designated marksman, and that was his identity. In this formation, regardless of the sling, that meant his right arm would not be available for precision operations for a minimum of 3 weeks. He sat with his left hand flat on the table and his eyes on the maps. Harmon outlined the plan with the economy of a man briefing people who already understand their jobs. Kara would establish a firing position on the south ridge, the one ridge line not held by the hostile element, offering clean line of sight to both sniper positions at 840 and 640 meters. She would neutralize both positions before the assault element moved. On confirmation, Harmon, Conroy, and Riley would breach the compound from the west. Decker would remain with Kara as security and backup medical support. Medical primary throughout, Harmon said. You carry the full kit. The rifle is secondary capability, not a reassignment. Any casualty is your first priority. The rifle is the tool that creates the conditions for the first priority to function. Clear gunnery, Sergeant. He looked around the table. Live ammunition is authorized for precision fire. This is not a drill. The people in that compound are role players, but they are playing people who are genuinely frightened, and we treat it accordingly. Zero tolerance for collateral risk. PFC Declan Pruitt, 19 years old and attending his first operational brief, raised his hand. Rules of engagement if a role player positions in proximity to the hostages. Break contact, reposition, wait for a clean solution. The mission succeeds only if 11 people come home, not 10. 11 on. The room held this. We step off at 0500 tomorrow. Gear check tonight. The team dispersed with the efficiency of people who have things to do before a thing that matters. Riley passed Kara near the door without slowing. He looked at her for 1 second with the open face of a 22-year-old who had not yet learned to compress what he felt into something more manageable. Then he was gone. She checked her medical supplies that evening with the attention that preceded every operation. Each item counted. Each placement confirmed, each contingency kit verified. Combat application tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, chest seals, airway adjuncts, IV supplies. The medications and syringes and equipment that turn the difference between survivable and unsurvivable into a function of whether the right hands were in the right place at the right time. Then she field stripped the M24 and cleaned it and reassembled it and function checked it and confirmed the zero based on the previous morning's performance data. She sat with both sets of equipment in front of her. Her father had written, "Medicine saves the man in front of you. The rifle saves the men behind him." She slept for 4 hours. The team stepped off at 0505 in a Nevada high desert that operated at 0500, in a transitional state, cool enough that breath was occasionally visible, dark enough that the terrain was primarily a sound and texture underfoot rather than a visible thing, but with the first suggestion of light at the eastern margin communicating that the day was coming. 9 people, 1 genuine objective. 62 pounds on Kara's frame, the rifle case adding 8 pounds above the medical pack. The additional weight communicated something about the operation's nature that no briefing had needed to say explicitly. They moved in silence for 3 kilometers. The terrain cooperated in the limited way that terrain cooperates. It did not become easy, but it disclosed itself honestly. At the final rally point, Harmon gathered the team in a low spot between 2 rock formations. The compound was visible as a geometric interruption in the natural terrain. Dark shapes angular, the specific wrongness of constructed things in an unconstructed landscape. Surveillance confirms both ridge positions are manned, Decker said. North ridge movement in the last 20 minutes. East ridge has been static. Harmon looked at Kara. She already had the firing position calculated. The elevated ground to the south rose to a natural shelf, enough elevation to observe both opposing ridge positions, enough distance from the compound to work outside the immediate defensive perimeter. I'm set, she said. Call your targets before you engage. Confirm hostile before every trigger pull. Understood. She and Decker moved to the south ridge line. The elevation gain was 40 meters over 120 of lateral movement. Decker moved with the unhurried competence of a man who had climbed worse terrain under worse conditions, and she matched him, reaching the shelf 8 minutes after departing the rally point. The shelf was what the map had promised, a natural platform of wind-smooth stone with a forward lip that provided concealment while permitting observation. The North Ridge position was visible at 840 meters, the role player in a ghillie suit in a competent hide. The East Ridge was visible at 640 meters, another figure with a simulated weapon system. She established prone, rifle on bipod, stock into shoulder, natural point of aim, confirmed. Decker settled 2 meters to her right and slightly behind the person who watches everything the shooter cannot see because the shooter is committed to a 6-degree arc of vision. This time there was no tremor. She noted its absence the way you note the absence of a sound that has become part of the background by the quality of the silence it left behind. The conflict was still present. The promise was still present. Her father's handwriting was still present in the muscles of her memory. But a decision made completely does not produce tremor. Breathe in, 4 counts, hold at 7, out 8, heart rate 63. Wind at her position 6 knots from the southwest, lighter mirage than yesterday, better conditions. She confirmed the wind was consistent at target distance through the mirage reading in the scope. She confirmed hostile. The role player in the ghillie suit oriented his simulated weapon system on the western approach corridor. This was the definition of the target she had been authorized to engage. She squeezed the trigger. At 840 meters, the figure in the ghillie suit went horizontal. First round, first hit. She worked the bolt without celebration, transitioning immediately to the second problem. The East Ridge, 640 meters. The target there had registered the firing, repositioning, moving laterally left to right at approximately 2.5 feet per second, working toward a rock formation that would break her line of sight in 4 seconds. Lead calculation. At 640 meters flight time, approximately 0.85 seconds. Half a body width of lead at this presentation angle. 3 seconds of margin remaining. She had one. She breathed out halfway, held the partial exhale, squeezed. At 640 meters, the moving figure stopped moving. North and east clear, she said on the radio. Assault element, it is free to move. Harmon's acknowledgement was a single click. The assault element was already moving. She maintained position and tracked the compound through the scope, not with a firing solution, but with observation. Watching entry points, windows, movement patterns, building the map of a building she had never entered through audio and visual data simultaneously. The assault element reached the compound perimeter in 4 minutes and 20 seconds. The breach was textbook. Radio traffic accelerated. Room clear, room clear. Hostage contact north corridor. Hostile down east room. Then Riley's voice. It came through differently than the others. Not in volume or frequency, the radio made everything equal in those dimensions. Different in the quality underneath the signal, beneath the transmission, the thing that voice carries regardless of what the words are doing. Contact, I'm hit, north room, leg, heavy bleed. She was already moving, not in sequence. As a whole, rifle secured in one motion, medical kit unshouldered, feet finding the slope, the distance between her position and the compound entrance, a problem she crossed without counting. Decker, I've got your back. She ran through the compound entrance, controlled transition from open terrain to enclosed space, left down the corridor. She heard Riley before she reached him. He was in the northwest corner, maximum cover from 2 entry points, the instinct of a trained Marine even while bleeding. His left hand was pressed against his upper thigh. The blood between his fingers had the color and pressure of arterial involvement. Femoral, not venous, arterial. She dropped beside him. Riley, eyes on me. His eyes found hers, present, focused. Doc. The voice of a 22-year-old making a serious effort to sound less scared than he was. You're going to be fine. Stay still. Tourniquet out. The combat application tourniquet applied high on the thigh above the injury site, close to the body, maximum occlusion. Tightened until the bleeding changed. Watch for the change. Confirmed it. High and tight. She assessed the wound. Single fragment medial thigh femoral artery compromised, but not severed. The difference between a situation and a crisis, and she was managing a situation. Am I going to lose it? No. Clean arterial involvement, repairable. You'll be running in 6 months. She reached for IV supplies. The fragment came from her right. She heard it before she felt it, the specific sonic signature of a ricocheted training around the high whine of something traveling at velocity after contact with a hard surface. Then the impact. Her right shoulder. the specific sensation of metal finding muscle and the heat that followed. She registered it, filed it, continued. Doc, Ma, Decker's voice from the doorway. You're hit. Aware, minor. Riley's critical. I'm operational. IV catheter 18 gauge left antecubital, her left hand working alone because her right arm was providing less reliable data than it had 30 seconds ago, the shoulder beginning to communicate in the language of pain and resistance. But the left hand was sufficient. First stick, catheter seated, lactated ringers running wide open. Riley's wrist, pulse strong rapid, not yet in shock. Close. She elevated his legs across her own knees to increase venous return, and in the doing of this, she heard the radio. Harmon, all elements, third hostile, West Ridge, 600 meters. He has angle into the compound. I have 2 people in the north room exposed to that firing position. I need it suppressed. She heard the geometry immediately. The West Ridge had not been in the initial briefing. Someone had repositioned from a 4th location or remained concealed through the initial movement and was now active, and the angle they held went through the compound's north wall at a geometry that put 2 people directly in possible line of fire. Decker, I don't have an angle from here. No one had an angle. The north room's position relative to the West Ridge required an exterior firing solution, someone outside the compound with elevation, with clear line of sight to a target at 600 meters. She looked at Riley. Tourniquet in place, Iver running. Stable, but stability was borrowed time, and every minute the West Ridge remained active was a minute that borrowed time was being spent. She looked at the M24 slung across her back. She looked at her right shoulder, where the fragment had seated itself in the muscle below the rotator cuff, the specific location of the impact. She had treated enough injuries to understand the mechanics. The fragment had found the tissue around the rotator cuff and the brachial plexus, the nerve network that gave the right arm its precision, and the arm's current communication was imprecise in a way that had a specific medical name and a specific prognosis. She knew what firing the rifle would do. The recoil of the M24 transmitted through the shoulder stock was measured in the language of force and direction, and her right shoulder was now a compromised structure. The nerve damage currently expressing itself as numbness and reduced fine motor control would become, with the addition of that force, something permanent in a way that temporary damage was not. She knew this with the same clinical certainty she brought to every injury she treated. Her right arm after this shot would retain functional recovery. Lifting, carrying the gross motor requirements of her work, those would return. Competition-level precision shooting, the kind measured in half inches at distance inherited from her father and carried through a national championship at 17, would not. Harmon did not call her name. She did not wait for him to. She had been a corpsman for 3 years and a shooter for 14, and the situation had exceeded the boundary where those 2 things could remain separate. She told Decker, "Stay on Riley. Keep the IV running. Don't let his legs down." She moved to the north room's doorway and out through the compound's secondary exit to the exterior on the north side, which put the West Ridge in her sightline at 600 meters and the sun 3 degrees above the eastern horizon. The target was visible immediately. West Ridge elevated position, a figure with a simulated weapon oriented toward the compound. She established position against the exterior wall, modified kneeling, not prone, because there was no time, and the geometry did not require it. Left elbow on her left knee, right shoulder accepting the stock with the specific adjustment of a shooter who had cataloged the damage and was accounting for it as a known variable rather than an impediment. Her right hand found the grip. The arm communicated its new reality, slight lag between intention and execution reduction in proprioceptive feedback. She recalibrated in real time, adjusting with her left side more deliberately than she normally would. Her father's voice from a range outside 29 Palms 16 years ago. The rifle is honest. It does exactly what you tell it to do. She told it what she needed. 600 meters, wind 8 knots northwest, static target. The calculation was straightforward compared to the previous morning's work, a range she had spent her adolescence considering moderate. She breathed, felt the shoulder's resistance to the stock, committed, squeezed. The rifle fired and the recoil arrived in the damaged shoulder like a door closing on a chapter that had begun 16 years ago on a range in the California desert. And through the scope, the figure on the West Ridge executed the protocol of someone who has been hit, and the West Ridge went still, and the radio began to move in the direction of resolution. She lowered the rifle. Her right arm filed its report, functional in the immediate sense, which was what she needed. What it would be in the permanent sense required equipment she did not have on a hillside in Nevada. She knew the answer without needing the equipment. She went back to Riley. Decker had maintained everything. Ivor running, tourniquet seated, legs elevated. Riley's color was better than 2 minutes ago, the blood volume replacement working the preparation and training, doing what it was designed to do. Hostile down, she said on the radio. West Ridge clear. Harmon acknowledged it. 20 minutes later, 11 hostages were in the debrief area, the compound was secured, and the medical transport helicopter was 17 minutes out. She sat on the ground outside the north room doorway, with her back against the exterior wall, right arm in an improvised sling, left hand maintaining pressure on the fragment wound. Decker sat beside her in the way that men of certain experience sit beside people who have just done difficult things, present quiet, not filling the space. The shoulder, he said, not a question. I know. He nodded. The helicopter arrived in 19 minutes. Riley was loaded first correctly in the order of clinical priority. Kara walked to the helicopter under her own power because she was able to, and because walking under your own power when you are able to is both professional standard and personal one. She climbed in. The helicopter lifted. Below the compound diminished the ridgelines that had held the morning's problems, receding into the larger geometry of terrain that could be comprehended from altitude in a way that it could not from inside it. The surgical team at Nellis was excellent and unhurried, the combination you wanted when someone was going to deliver information about your body's permanent limitations. The fragment was extracted under local anesthesia, the wound cleaned and closed, the shoulder imaged in 3 planes. The surgeon came out after the imaging. He sat down with the manner of a man who had delivered this category of information before and understood it did not benefit from qualification. Rotator cuff surgical repair, 6-month recovery, full functional strength returns. The brachial plexus involvement is where the permanence sits. The nerve damage from the fragment, combined with the recoil force, the fine motor control you had prior to this morning, isn't something we can restore. Functional arm use excellent. Gross motor strength, full recovery. He looked at her directly. Competition-level precision shooting requires a quality of brachial plexus signal we cannot reconstruct. That specific capability is gone. She heard him. She processed the information with the same clinical attention she gave to other people's injuries, accurate, complete, no negotiation with the facts. Understood, she said. He waited, apparently expecting something more. She didn't have anything more. The information was what it was. She had understood the gun before she incurred it, which was different from not minding the cost, but it was the thing she had. Riley's surgery completed 4 hours later. The arterial repair was clean, the surgeon's word carrying the specific reassurance of technical evaluation rather than bedside manner. Clean meant complete. Clean meant 6 months and running again, as she had told him on the floor of the north room, while her tourniquet was doing the work that made the surgery possible. She moved through the hours that followed with the particular quality of someone on the other side of a significant event. Not quiet from exhaustion, but quiet from the specific stillness that follows a decision fully executed. The hospital corridors, the waiting area, the window that showed Nevada in the later afternoon, the light changed from the operational heat of the morning into something cooler. The colors shifting from hostile tan into something that had the quality of conclusion without the sentimentality. 2 days later, a message appeared on her phone from an unfamiliar number. 3 words, South Boston, compressed into its essential form. No punctuation, no ceremony, come back soon. She sat with that for a long time. The evening of the second day, the door to her room opened, and Barrett came through it, still in his sling, moving with the careful economy of a man managing pain without advertising it. 2 people in slings in a military medical facility in Nevada. He sat in the chair beside the window without asking, which was the same presumption he had made on her footlocker 3 nights ago, which by now was simply the way he moved through space in her vicinity. He looked at her right arm in the sling. She looked at his right arm in the sling. He did not say anything for a long time. Then the surgeon says functional recovery. 6 months. Same, she said, but not that. He absorbed this. In the particular silence of a precision shooter hearing that another precision shooter has lost the thing that defined them both. Calhoun called me, Barrett said, while I was in the transport. He paused. He said thank you for today, for... He stopped, started again. He said it took him a long time to understand that my missing that shot in Ramadi wasn't what cost us the objective. It was the 18 years I spent not talking about it. She looked at the window. Your father, he said. I looked him up after the armory that first night. A pause. He was the real thing. Yeah, she said. He was. So are you. He stood. The sling made the movement awkward, and he managed it without comment. He walked to the door. Barrett? He stopped. The second shot, in training. You watch me adjust. Yeah. Did you know then? He was quiet for a moment. I suspected since the armory. The second shot confirmed it. He looked at her. The capability isn't gone. It changed. Different now. He paused. Different from mine too now. He left. She sat with what he had left behind, the specific weight of being seen clearly by someone who knew exactly what they were looking at. She stayed at the window until the Nevada evening completed itself, until the desert had cooled from the day's accumulation of heat, and the light had fully changed, and the room held the particular quality of a space in which something had been resolved. She opened the footlocker and took out the journal. Opened it to the last page her father had written. The final entry, dated 3 days before his death, the handwriting at its most reduced letters, still formed correctly, still precisely spaced the discipline, holding to the end, even as the hands that held the pen had nearly given up on everything else. He had written 4 lines. The measure of a warrior isn't the lives taken, it's the lives protected. The wisdom to know when to fight and when to heal. The completeness to do both when required. She read it once, closed the journal, placed it on the nightstand rather than the footlocker, which was the same small choice she had made 3 nights ago in the barracks in California, and which meant exactly the same thing it had meant then, which was more than a small thing. She went outside. The concrete step outside the facility's west entrance faced the desert in the direction the sun had gone. Nevada in the evening after a hot day held a specific quality of air, the residual warmth of ground that had been heating since dawn, the beginning of the cooling that the night would complete, the particular stillness of terrain that has finished one thing and not yet begun another. She sat on the step. Her left hand went into her pocket and found the challenge coin. The one from the national championship at 17, the score the judges had discussed in the parking lot. The coin she had buried under medical techs and spare uniforms in a footlocker in a series of bases across a career spent constructing distance from everything it represented. The coin was warm from her pocket. Her corpsman badge was on her uniform over her left breast pocket, where it had been every day for 3 years. She held the coin in her left hand, the hand that retained its precision, that would continue to do the work the medical kit required, that would put tourniquets on and IVs in and maintain the record that had read 63 casualties treated and 0 preventable deaths, and would continue reading forward from that number. Her right hand rested in the sling, the shoulder delivering its new permanent information in the language of chronic sensation she was already beginning to learn to interpret. It held the badge imperfectly, the fingers unreliable, but present, the intention complete, even where the execution was not. The coin and the badge, the rifle that could no longer do its finest work, and the medical kit that would continue to do its own. The capability she had inherited, and the choice she had made, and the permanent cost of the morning that was, if she read it correctly, something that was not only a cost. She had used both hands. She had used them completely, which was the only way they had ever worked. The only way he had ever taught her they could work. Both hands. The words left her, quietly going nowhere in particular, directed at no one present. They went into the cooling air in the wide Nevada dark way words go when they have been held a long time and are finally released, not with force, not with ceremony, but with the simple completeness of something that has finished becoming what it was always going to be. She had spent 5 years running from her father's legacy, running from the capability he had given her, from the identity it implied, from the name the Marine Corps had given him and the shadow it cast. She had built the distance deliberately, brick by brick, medical kit in the place of the rifle case, the healer's identity constructed over the shooter's, like a second wall over a first. The wall had not disappeared. It had revealed itself as unnecessary. She was not him. She had never been in danger of being him. He had known this, had written it in a letter to the commandant and in a journal entry, and in the specific way he had looked at her on a range outside 29 Palms when she was 17 years old and had just posted a score that judges would discuss in parking lots. He had been proud of the shooter. He had been prouder of the person who knew when not to shoot. And he had been proud, as she understood now, of the daughter who had chosen healing as her primary commitment, not as retreat from capability, but as the fullest expression of everything he had tried to give her. The capability was hers. Both of them. The rifle had done what it needed to do and had given back what it cost, and that transaction was complete, and what remained was the work she had chosen. 63 casualties treated, 0 preventable deaths. A record that would continue forward from those numbers, with both hands available for the work, one changed, one unchanged, together sufficient. The stars came out over Nevada the way stars come out in the desert all at once, like a decision already made. patient and indifferent and present. The same stars her father had navigated by. The same sky he had watched from 100 firing positions in the dark in Kuwait and in Kunar province, and on a range outside 29 Palms, while his daughter learned that a rifle was honest and a miss with information, and the capability you earned with discipline was the only kind that stayed. She did not feel like him. She felt like herself, which was what he had always wanted. The coin was warm in her left hand. The badge was in her right. The desert held them both, and the night came on, and somewhere in a recovery room in the same building, a 22-year-old kid from South Boston was sleeping off surgery on a femoral artery repair that would heal clean in 6 months, and he had already sent 3 words across the cell network that said everything 3 words could carry, and she had read them and would carry them forward the way she carried everything that mattered present accounted for. Irrelevant to the work, but essential to the person doing it. Both hands. The desert received the words without judgment, without ceremony, for exactly as long as they needed to last. She stayed until the last of the light was gone, and the night was complete, and the step beneath her had given up the last of the day's warmth. Then she stood. She went inside. The work was waiting the way work always waited, without urgency, without impatience, simply present as it had been before, and would be after, as certain and reliable as distance and wind, and the honest testimony of a well-made rifle that did exactly what you told it to do and gave back exactly what you put in. Both hands. She had both.